This episode of New Politics was released on the 29th of May, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
What happens when independents stop being independent? Can the Teals become a political party without destroying the very thing that made voters trust them in the first place? The Teals may have started off as the protest movement all the way back in 2019, but unless they do this properly, they risk becoming exactly what voters were trying to escape from. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
And if you're listening in and haven't subscribed to our website at New Politics, you're missing out on half of what we do. There's regular articles and analysis of this strange world of politics. It's all free, and you can subscribe at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, if you do want to support us, it's just $5 per month at Patreon and Substack, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
If these independents actually came together and formed a new political party, would the major parties be in more trouble?
There is a hunger out there for something alternative that is, well, the adult in the room that is not One Nation.
One Nation would obliterate the coalition if an election was held right now. That's what one poll is suggesting.
Unless something drastically changes, Angus Taylor should be incredibly worried.
So would a Teal Party be another big threat?
The Teals have already acted like a party for years. I don't know what's new.
The brand that the Teal independents offer is centre-right, centre-left, socially progressive, economically moderate. That's missing from the political conversation right now across the country because the Liberal Party's moved so far over to the right and chasing that One Nation vote. They've completely abandoned that territory, and so there's a vacuum.
It will certainly make them more viable going forward. On the other hand, running a major party is really tough.
The polling from the Redbridge Group shows that One Nation would become the opposition if an election was held today, depleting the Liberals and wiping out the National Party.
It's anti-establishment. Some people would like to characterise it as a shift to the right. I would like to just define it as a bunch of Australians sick of the two-party system.
There's been a new development among some of the independent members of Parliament, and that is the idea of becoming a political party. And this highlights one of the big contradictions in this process. Part of the appeal of the Teal independents is the fact that they are independent. And over the past 2 or 3 election cycles, we can see that these Teal independents have succeeded because they are not a political party. Now, David, we have to remember that the Teals have emerged in the wealthy urban electorates where many traditional Liberal voters left the Liberal Party because of people such as Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton, and with that constant engagement with culture war politics that no one really cares too much about. And these voters in these seats, they want to support economic stability and political competence, but they also want to see serious action on climate change. They want to see integrity in politics, and they're also interested in socially progressive values. Now, the Teals offered a political escape for a lot of these voters, and a lot of these voters would probably never vote for the Labor Party, but they will vote for community independents who appear to be pragmatic and professional, and they exist outside of the tribal warfare of mainstream party politics. And it's not just the Teals that we're talking about here. David Pocock has been also one of the names suggested as part of this future party, if it does come to that. But the issue would be that once you become a political party, you then become something different. And I think it's just a question of what you end up becoming.
It's a big call, and a lot of people are saying it can't work. People voted for these candidates because they were independent. I think they voted for them because they demonstrated a new way of centre-right politics. The main thing they objected to, apart from the personalities of Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton, whose public personas seem to be some kind of false construct aimed at appeasing people who the traditional Liberal voter really had nothing in common with. I'm not saying they didn't like them. They didn't say that they felt superior to them, or in some cases they may have, but that's not the point. The point is that while Scott Morrison was trying to get the, call it the bogan vote, and I'm using that term as a catch-all phrase that I don't really mean, but you all know what I'm talking about, showed that this bogan vote wasn't that big. and it had shrunk by the time Peter Dutton came in and tried to swing on the same thing. So maybe I can use the phrase properly because it doesn't exist in the way that politics would have it. I don't know that the Teals forming a party will be the electoral disaster that commentators across the board, it's not just the Sky News people and the right journalists saying this, who obviously with the vested interest of please don't destroy our party, but left commentators have said it too. And I can certainly see where they're coming from. It's not a stupid argument by any standard. But I think if presented well, it might actually help. Now, the fact that they're considering somebody like David Pocock and Allegra Spender can cohabit in the same party, and this is not a criticism of either, I'm just looking purely at their beliefs, their ideals, their electorates, is a big ask. Having said that, the Greens somehow manage. Labor manages with traditionally the very conservative Catholic wing and the more radical socialist wing. Liberal Party, John Howard famously said it's a broad church before purging most of the people that made it a broad church. It's not that they can't exist and work together and work constructively together. It's just that, do they want to? The other thing too, and I've said this several times, people get very disappointed that people who win right-wing seats like Kooyong and Wentworth, the left gets very disappointed when those figures tend to have right-wing views on certain things. Now, they've always been honest about this, and so that's fine by me. If we know what we're voting for, that's great. I don't live in those seats going to say, oh, Helen Haynes disappointed me because she's not as in favour of unions as, say, I am. But she or any of the others never claimed to be. So I don't think it's going to be a problem if they formed a party. They may have to work out the new form of party, though. I think just forming a centre-right Liberal Party based on Menzies and Howardist ideals will very quickly lead to the problem that the current party that was founded on that heads to. They're going to have to rethink the philosophy of party, the philosophy of what the centre-right is in modern Australia. They've probably done this in practical ways rather than philosophical ways. But yeah, I don't think it's an electoral disaster in the way that people will say, oh, they're in a party now, then they voted for them. They voted for them because, one, they were good candidates. That's really important to remember. They were good candidates. Two, they held opinions that fitted in, for the most part, with their electorates, particularly the treatment of women, particularly and probably more importantly, the environment and making sure the environment was right, which sort of disabuses the idea that the environment is a left-wing cause and we can ignore it.
Well, the environment does affect everyone, but I think it does. It affects left and right, centre. It affects absolutely everyone. But I think the most important thing with all of this is that not just for the Teal independents, but for any independent out there, but you just don't want to become that thing that you've always opposed. And we've had Anthony Albanese saying that he fights Tories. He said that all the way back in 2010, and then he becomes one of the Tories when he's actually in government. So you don't want to have that sort of thing happening, but sometimes you do have to be pragmatic in politics. And if all of this is trying to create a balance or a counterbalance to what's happening on the centre-right of politics, and especially with One Nation, with what we've been seeing over the past six months, and, but having said that, I don't think that the Teals are centre-left anyway. They might be more progressive than what remains of the Liberal Party. They're socially progressive but economically conservative, and most of them are supporters of the State of Israel as well. But I guess the point is that there is that old adage that united we stand and divided we fall, the old union slogan, but there is strength in numbers. But I think overall it is a bit of a dilemma. I'm not for or against it. I'm just saying that if they do achieve this political party, they need to be quite careful about it, because Monique Ryan, Helen Haynes and Kate Chaney, they've already ruled out this idea of forming a party. I don't think they've ruled it out completely, but they've said, we're not so sure about this. But if you do formalise this group of independents into a political party, you do lose that appeal of being an independent. You can't say that you're independent anymore and possibly lose votes there, but it does give you a formal party status and possibly more funding to do your work. And there's also other options too, continuing as a loose alliance or maybe firming up that loose alliance. They're already in an alliance anyway. They're known as the Teal Independents, primarily through that support coming in from Climate 200. And I think we also have to remember that the Teal movement was there as part of that backlash against Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton, and even Tony Abbott going back longer. But all of those people are no longer there. And there's not that many people left in the Liberal Party anyway. So it's sort of hard to know. My feeling is that if they are pragmatic, they will form a political party. And if they're not pragmatic, they won't. I guess that goes without saying. But yeah, either way, I think they'll have to work out something here.
When we look at the Constitution, of course, the Constitution doesn't mention parties. It doesn't really mention how the Prime Minister becomes Prime Minister. We've gone on the convention under the Westminster system where a group of people coalesce around a leader. They give that leader the confidence and the supply to be leader. That leader then fulfills the functions of whatever functions the Prime Minister is supposed to fill.
And is the Prime Minister actually mentioned in the Constitution? No,
not at all. No, only the Governor-General, the Chief Justice of the High Court. Not the Prime Minister. So that it's possible that we're seeing a shift. The authors of the Constitution looked at the British model. And one of the geniuses of the Australian Constitution, it's a flawed document, but there is genius in it, is that they're not too prescriptive. They saw that down the track things would have to change. Some of the stuff they made maybe possibly a little bit too difficult to change in terms of having the referendum, but other stuff they could fairly, not easily, but they could, if you could convince the High Court, who is one of the balancers in this, if you could convince the High Court that this is right, they could set up a loose coalition of independents. This wouldn't be a problem. Like all those independents could rally around Zali Steggall. Hello, Sally. I'm not saying this is what should happen, but they could, and Zali Steggall becomes Prime Minister. And then she then puts Allegra Spender as Foreign Minister and Helen Haynes as Attorney General, and I forget who, David Pocock's a lawyer, he'd be Attorney General, etc., etc. There's nothing, as far as I can tell, that's constitutionally wrong with that, provided the High Court, who would presumably get a challenge from either the Liberal or the Labor Party saying, this isn't what they had in mind. The parties are implied like the implied right of free speech. It's just that they couldn't tell what parties that they were going to get. And that's true. The Liberal Party of Australia technically didn't exist. The Labor Party of Australia, or the Australian Labor Party, did exist, but in a much different form. The Greens, One Nation, all of those didn't exist. So the Constitution allows for that natural evolutionary change. Would the polity allow for a loose coalition of independents? I think it would, based on my reading, with the High Court as the arbiter of whether it's workable or not. The floor of Parliament too, if they argue and Zali loses confidence and they put in Zoe Daniels. Oh, she's not in Parliament at the moment, but put in another one.
Tim Wilson, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, essentially you could have 151 independent members of Parliament as well. So they'd have to work out who's going to be the Prime Minister. And naturally, they congregate towards a party formation anyway. So that's the way that would probably work.
The parties make it easier. The pre-selections, having a formal policy platform that you can say, okay, this is what the Liberal Party says, this is what the Labor Party says, this is what the Green says. So seat to seat, whereas 151 independents mightn't work that well. Having said that, we vote in seats. So we might not need this more complex in an age where mass mailings can be highly targeted through social media, through email, through WhatsApp, through Telegram, through WeChat, through all of them. Maybe this is the future, that they're not parties, that they will just coalesce, one broadly on what we now laughingly call the right, one broadly on what we now laughingly call the left, and crossbenchers. I don't know that if the Teals formed the Screaming Communist Party, that's what I assume they've called from listening to Sky News, the Screaming Communist Radical Feminist Party, if they formed that, I don't know that they'd lose many votes because, one, they've all been pretty good local members.
This is New Politics, independent analysis of Australian and international politics. For more free articles and analysis, join us at newpolitics.com.au.
Well, that's the key point, I think, and also the way that the Teals have grown in Australia. It did start off in the 2019 federal election with the election of Zali Steggall. She defeated Tony Abbott at that time, but that was in response to the neglect of the Liberal Party of their key supporters in these key seats. And the result is that 6 years later, the Liberal Party, 6 years after the 2019 election, the Liberal Party doesn't hold any of the inner city seats across any capital city in Australia. Now, not all of those seats were lost to the Teals, but most of them were. Some of them were picked up by the Labor Party. And I think we can sort of look at that point to say, well, that was the beginning of the end of the Liberal Party. And the same kind of neglect is, the way that I see it, is that the same kind of neglect is happening within the Labor government. And a lot of people have been saying to me, oh, come on, what are you talking about? The Labor Party's got 94 seats in federal Parliament. That can't be right. What do you mean? But the Liberal Party was also in a strong position back in 2013. They had 91 seats in federal Parliament. They neglected their key supporters, and look where they are now. And I just think that overall there's been this collapse of meaningful political representation for working and lower middle income people in Australia. And if they felt that they were getting what they needed politically from the Labor Party or the Labor government, they'd be hanging around, but they're leaving. They're not leaving in droves, but some people have decided, oh, look, no, the Labor Party's not for us. And some of them are going off to One Nation, some of them are going elsewhere. And this is all in the context of what's happening with the opinion polling right now and at this particular stage, and that might change before the next election. But I think the question is, would people like that go off to the Australian Greens, or would they go off and vote for a Teal type candidate in a working class seat? And I think it depends on who the candidate is, but there is a bit of a vacuum that will develop over time if the Labor government doesn't attend to these key issues. And sure, you can say that they're filling in those spaces at the moment because they've got those seats in those areas, but that could so easily change the next federal election like it did for the Liberal Party all those years ago.
One of the smartest things any politician ever said was the Country Party, Archie Cameron. In politics, you cock of the walk one week and feather duster the next. And that's absolutely true. Macmillan, British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, a week is a long time in politics. One election cycle can change things. Now, mathematically, Labor isn't going to lose the next election. It could lose 20 seats, which in most elections would be a bloodbath. And what they got, 94, they lose 20, that takes them down to 74, which in most elections is still a really strong. I don't know that they can lose more than 20. Mathematically, I don't think they can lose more than 20 at the next election.
Well, it did take the Liberal Party 12 years to go from 91 seats in 2013 to 42 seats in 2025.
The ship of state turns slowly, but once the turn starts, it's very hard to correct. And there's an argument that Labor is governing with the long-term in plan, that they know they're going to win the next election, probably the one after that. But you can get cocky with that too. And the new opposition may be a fragmented coalition, but that doesn't matter. All you need is a good opposition. And I think people forget that. A good opposition makes governments better. John Hewson against Bob Hawke. They had to really think about their policy because they knew they had someone who understood economics to the level that Keating did, for example. So that Labor then had to make sure that their economic arguments were sound.
And they ended up getting rid of Bob Hawke at that time too.
Yep. And they did too. Yep. A good opposition can really force a government into stuff maybe they don't want to do, or into better governance. And of course, one doesn't necessarily cancel out the other, as we saw with the Morrison government.
Oh, sure. But there's going to be those voids and vacuums all over the place. And I think the One Nation is filling in that vacuum because the major parties are still failing to address key issues, not just the Liberal Party, if you can still call them a major party, but the Labor government as well. And I think with One Nation, there's still a bit of hot air at the moment, and these are just opinion polls at the moment that's showing the support for One Nation. We did have their vote increase in the South Australian election as well, but during the week we had Barnaby Joyce complaining that One Nation hasn't got enough resources provided by government at the moment. Pauline Hanson also chipped in, and they need more staff as well. But you get staff allocations based on how many seats you've got and how many people you represent, not how you're going in the opinion polls. And again, I think that's sort of retail politics coming in from Barnaby Joyce, or a lot more hot air coming from One Nation. But not all of it is hot air, David. So,
and remember too, this was the guy who said we had too much government in our lives.
That's right.
In
his face. Yeah, he had it in his face. But One Nation, they recently announced that it supports a 25% tax on gas exports, and they also want to set up a sovereign resource fund similar to Norway. Also propose reducing negative gearing to properties. And these are policies that are popular. And we've been calling on the Labor government to introduce these measures. They should listen to us more often, and they should introduce
these. All our One Nation voters.
Yes. And they should be introducing these measures in the national interest. And the Labor government could have implemented a lot of this stuff years ago. And this is the problem when you're too much of an incrementalist, or you're too cautious and you do piecemeal sort of stuff, or you pander to vested interests. And if you stop behaving like a Labor government should, you cede that ground to others, and other people steal your clothing and take on some of those policies. And once that starts to happen, it's very difficult to stop it.
Yeah. If Labor had brought in the 25% gas tax on exports, that's still a bit generous, but it's a start. Suddenly you neutralise One Nation, because what are they going to do? Say, oh, it should have been more. That's what you called for. Oh, it's too much. That's what it called for. It's quite easy to head One Nation off at the pass, as it were, and neutralise the debates.
Oh, but also if One Nation somehow got into government and they talked up this policy of 25% gas exports tax, they probably wouldn't introduce it anyway.
Oh, God, no. No,
the vested interests come into it. So it's just that once you get into these positions of power, if it does come to that, you do realise the limitations of your power as well. And, you know, these are definitely things that should be introduced, but you've got to really push it hard. And it's just that something like a 25% gas exports tax, it's almost like the antithesis of One Nation policy, because they are supported by the resources industry, and they'd barely introduce something like this.
Yeah, and of course, anything said in the middle of the term can be safely disregarded at election time, because it doesn't matter at the moment. It's only when the election ramps up, particularly for One Nation, who is constitutionally all about Pauline Hanson being prominent in elections. It's not really about winning elections, just getting that 4% of the primary vote, enough that they can maintain the party and Pauline's paid position as the head of the party. And I'm not sure Barnaby quite understands this. He'll be happily sacrificed if it means that Pauline gets more money, but they lose a seat. As the traditional party system starts to fragment, where does it leave people like Cory Bernardi, like Barnaby Joyce, all those people who think that One Nation runs as a traditional party? It runs outside the traditional parties. Once Pauline's gone, I don't know what they're going to do, because you can't remove her from the leadership of the party. You can remove her from Parliament, sure, by voting her out. But unless they could force a new constitution in, and I don't think anyone has the numbers to do that, because it's not a democracy. That's a different problem to what Liberal and Labor, and to a lesser extent the National Party, and to a lesser extent again the Greens are facing. But it's still a problem. Can a modern democracy work on basically an authoritarian mode of party government, in which it is Pauline Hanson's One Nation? Pauline is the leader for life, I think. It is the constitutional term. Yes, constitutions will be changed, but good luck trying that one.
So we started off talking about the Teals forming a party, and then we morphed over to talking about the Labor Party and then One Nation. But I think overall, just discussing...
But it's the same problem.
Yeah, it is, because I think the overall issue is, or the big issue is, that a lot of people are starting to feel politically homeless. And I think politics over the past 40, 50 years, especially over the past 10, 15 years, has become less tribal than it used to be. And we had the Teals that were filling in the void left behind by the Liberal Party. Might not have known it at the time, but it was something that was definitely happening. And I think that there's just a lot of issues that are putting a lot of pressure on working families, lower income people. Housing is unaffordable for many people around Australia. And I'm not just talking about buying a house, but actually renting a house as well. It's becoming quite unaffordable, stagnant wages, cost of living issues. And, I don't want to make it seem like it's just so easy, but most of politics is just giving people what they want and bringing it down to the most simple level. You give people what they want. And Anthony Albanese had a big chance a few weeks ago with the budget, that 25% tax on gas exports. We were going on about that quite a lot. A lot of popular support for it. Would have raised $20 billion per year for the budget. And the most work Anthony Albanese did was to fly over to Perth to tell the mining industry and the WA government that he was not going to introduce a 25 gas exports tax, so the resources industry wouldn't start up an ad campaign against him. Similar to negative gearing, like they introduced those changes in the budget, which you and I think are good, but it's only 1% of what's actually needed. So ultimately had some big chances there, but these chances have been squibbed. And if you're not going to give people what they want or act fully in the national interest, well, the electorate is going to think, well, what are you there for? What are you doing there? And they're going to start asking that question. That's when they start looking elsewhere to see if there's a better fit for them politically. And the Teal independents, that could be part of where people are starting to look. And they have been looking at them over the past 6 or 7 years. But if you're looking at other seats outside of the affluent areas, they might start looking at Teal independents as well. And there were those discussions about Teal candidates targeting Labor seats, and they haven't really had that much success there, or they haven't had any success at all, and they haven't really targeted that many seats anyway. Maybe they'd have a different colour to differentiate those Labor seats. I don't know, purple or puce colour or something like that instead of teal. But the point is that there's definitely a new dynamic that is appearing in the party, or the parties that start organising themselves the best. Well, they will be the ones that succeed.
Yeah, and it'll be a mixture of natural evolution and smart, and I mean that genuinely, clever people working out what the population wants. It's what Howard did in the 90s. Was it the best for the population? No, but he worked out what the people wanted, what they wanted to hear, at least. It was Hawke and Keating in the 80s. Again, was it all perfect? Maybe not, but it is what people wanted to hear. And of course, both governments sometimes had to go against what the people wanted to ensure that there was less term long damage to whatever the policy was. But that's the management of politics. If it was easy, you wouldn't see the dramatic ageing in people who take the job seriously. Paul Keating at the beginning of his term as Prime Minister looked much older. John Howard aged more than you'd think. Malcolm Turnbull aged more than you think. Scott Morrison didn't age at all, which might tell us something about Scott Morrison.
Well, he seemed to appear to be younger as the years went on.
Yes, even Tony Abbott. And I'm not a fan of all of these people, don't get me wrong, but the objective observation is that they look much older at the end of their term and relatively short terms than they did at the beginning. The late nights, the constantly interrupted sleep, the high stress, the high pressure meetings, the decisions that no matter which way you go, somebody's going to get hurt. All this weighs on people with conscience, with people with some empathy, with people with human attributes. Bob Hawke, at the end of his 11 years, looked like he'd aged 20 years or 25 years. And maybe it's time to look at easier ways. Maybe we put on term limits like the US president. Maybe we put age limits in. I'm not sure, but you hit a certain age, you have to step down.
Or just like federal court judges, they have to step down at the age of 70.
Yep. Myself, I like limiting term. You get 4 goes in the House of Reps and 3 goes in the Senate, and then you can go out. Yeah. And be used as a consultant or whatever, sure. You don't want to lose the expertise, but you don't want a parliament full of people who know nothing but parliament, I think. And yes, you don't, as I said, you don't want to lose that expertise. You don't want to lose the advice that long servers can give you. But do you want someone who's done nothing but work in politics 30 years down the track, making decisions that have no bearing on real world decisions because they don't have enough knowledge of the world outside of politics? I won't say the real world, but I suppose that Liberal Party people will go into their think tanks and Labor Party people will go into the unions or their think tanks. But even they can be mentors, they can be party policy developers, they can be brought in for advice. You don't get as many burnouts. You have to think of succession planning. I think it's something that we should consider.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join New Politics at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month, and we always try to keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.